There are moments in life when you realize the people you bleed for, the ones you sacrifice everything for, see you as nothing more than a convenient fool. I had one such moment. Not a single, sudden jolt, but a slow, agonizing realization that culminated in a scene I'll never forget. A scene where their laughter, once a familiar sound, turned into the fuel for my own quiet revolution. My name is Elara, and for 7 long years, my life was a carefully constructed exercise in self-denial. My apartment was a cramped, perpetually drafty studio above a bustling fish market in the district of Eldoria. The smell of brine and old newspapers was my constant companion. My wardrobe consisted of 3 pairs of jeans, a handful of t-shirts, and a single, faded winter coat. Luxuries, they were for other people. My meals were meticulously budgeted, often relying on instant ramen or whatever was on sale at the discount grocer. Coffee was a rare indulgence, a treat I allowed myself only after a particularly brutal double shift. You see, I wasn't a natural ascetic. I had dreams, just like anyone else. Dreams of traveling, of a cozy home filled with books, of a life free from the constant gnaw of financial anxiety. But those dreams were placed on a shelf, gathering dust, beneath a much heavier burden. My younger brother, Cale, had been diagnosed with a rare, debilitating illness, and the treatments, the specialists, the experimental therapies, they were astronomical. My parents, bless their hearts, were overwhelmed. My father worked a grueling job at the docks, and my mother took on odd sewing jobs, but it was never enough. So I stepped in. I was barely out of school when Cale's diagnosis hit. I dropped my plans for university, my aspirations of becoming an architect, and instead I became a financial lifeline. I worked 2, sometimes 3, jobs. Mornings were spent at the local bakery, kneading dough before dawn. The scent of warm bread a cruel reminder of the simple comfort I couldn't afford. Afternoons, I was a data entry clerk in a sterile office, my fingers flying across the keyboard, eyes burning from screen glare. Evenings, I'd clean offices downtown, scrubbing floors and emptying bins, often until past midnight. My hands were perpetually chapped, my body a constant ache. Every single penny, every extra shift, every sacrifice of my own comfort went towards Cale's treatments. My parents would tell me how grateful they were, how I was their angel, their savior. They'd hug me tight, their eyes sometimes misty, and I'd feel a warmth spread through me, a sense of purpose that made the exhaustion bearable. Cale, frail but always with a gentle smile, would whisper his thanks, promising to repay me someday. I didn't want repayment. I just wanted him to get better. Years blurred into a cycle of work, worry, and ramen. Friends moved on, pursuing careers, getting married, buying homes. I smiled and waved, offering congratulations, but inside a quiet ache persisted. My life was on hold. My social life was non-existent. Dating. An impossible luxury. Who had time for romance when the weight of a family's survival rested on your shoulders? I convinced myself it was fine, noble even. This was love. This was family. This was what good people did. My parents and Cale lived in a small, rented house, but at least it was a house. They had a car, an older model but functional. I lived frugally so they wouldn't have to. I wanted them to have some semblance of normalcy, some comfort, while Cale fought his battle. I believed with every fiber of my being that I was doing the right thing, that my sacrifices were acknowledged, appreciated, and soon they would pay off. That one day, Cale would be well and I could finally start my own life. I was wrong. I was so terribly, painfully wrong. The invitation arrived like a gilded taunt. My cousin, Lyra, was getting engaged to some wealthy merchant from the Southern Territories. The engagement party was to be a grand affair at the opulent Obsidian Palace, a place I'd only ever seen in glossy magazines. My parents, of course, were thrilled. They insisted I attend, despite my protests about the cost of a new dress or the sheer awkwardness of my presence amid such extravagance. They even offered to pay for a modest outfit, a rare gesture that softened my resolve. I picked the simplest dress I could find, a deep blue that hoped to blend in. The evening was a blur of shimmering fabrics, clinking crystal, and the cloying scent of exotic flowers. Lyra, adorned in diamonds, glowed with an almost blinding happiness. I found myself hovering near the edges of conversations, nursing a single glass of sparkling cider. It was all so far removed from my world of Eldoria and endless shifts. I saw my parents, laughing loudly with a group of distant relatives, looking remarkably well-fed and relaxed. My mother wore a new silken gown, and my father's suit looked tailored, not off the rack. A pang of pride, mixed with a familiar, dull envy, went through me. Good for them, I thought. They deserve a night of enjoyment. I was heading to the restroom when I overheard snippets of a conversation from a secluded alcove. My parents' voices, distinctive in their jovial tones. I paused, about to greet them, when a phrase caught my ear. My name. And Elara, bless her heart, my mother chuckled, a sound I had always associated with comfort, now laced with something I couldn't quite place. Still thinks she's our little martyr, working herself to the bone for Kale's expensive treatments. My blood ran cold. My father joined in, his voice booming with a hearty laugh. Honestly, the stories she makes up. An imaginary fiancé, can you believe it? Some grand architect from the capital city who's going to swoop in and rescue her from her self-imposed poverty. The world tilted. Imaginary fiancé. I hadn't mentioned a fiancé to anyone, let alone my parents. What were they talking about? And Kale's expensive treatments. A phrase delivered with such dripping sarcasm, such casual cruelty, that it felt like a physical blow. Then came the words that truly shattered me. Another relative, an aunt I barely knew, piped up. Oh, she's always been a bit dramatic, hasn't she? Always needing to be the hero. Remember that time she insisted on giving up her savings for your sick cat? My mother scoffed. Exactly. And Kale's perfectly fine, by the way, been in remission for years. We just let her believe it. It kept her motivated, you know. Kept her sending money. The Eldoria studio is practically free, and those jobs she has, barely minimum wage. She thinks she's saving us, but she's just pathetic. My father added, we even got a new vacation villa in the coastal region last year. Used some of Elara's treatment funds for the down payment. She'd never suspect. The poor fool, always so easy to manipulate. My heart didn't just sink, it imploded. Kale, remission, years. The endless shifts, the threadbare clothes, the instant ramen, the agonizing worry, the dreams put on hold, all for a lie. All for a family that called me pathetic, a fool, easy to manipulate. The betrayal was a physical ache, a searing pain that started in my chest and spread like wildfire through my limbs. My own parents, the people I had adored, trusted, sacrificed for, they weren't just taking my money. They were laughing at my virtue, mocking my love. I stumbled backward, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a cry. My vision blurred, not just from tears, but from the sheer, overwhelming rush of sickening revelation. The new gown, the tailored suit, the relaxed laughter, the vacation villa, every puzzle piece clicked into place, forming a monstrous, grotesque picture of deception. They had been living a life of comfort, funded by my sweat and my tears, all while I believed I was saving my brother. They hadn't needed my money, they had preyed on my devotion. And the imaginary fiancé, a cruel joke, a casual fabrication to further their mockery. The thought of it, the utter contempt in their voices when they spoke of me, twisted a knife in my gut. I wasn't just betrayed, I was ridiculed. I was a punchline. The realization hit me with the force of a tidal wave. I was utterly alone, and the people I thought were my anchors were actually the ones drowning me. I didn't confront them. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't even make a sound. The raw, gut-wrenching pain was so immense that it cauterized something inside me. All emotion drained away, leaving behind a terrifying, empty calm. My mind, usually a whirlwind of anxieties, became a pristine, silent chamber where a single, chilling thought began to echo: revenge. I turned on my heel and walked out of that opulent party. I didn't say goodbye, didn't glance back. The air felt thin, sharp, devoid of the perfumed warmth of the palace. I hailed a cab, the extravagant expense barely registering. I just needed to be away from the gilded cage of their deceit. All the way back to my cold studio, my mind was not on their betrayal, but on their downfall. The victim was gone. The architect of ruin had been born. The moment I stepped into my dim apartment, I didn't collapse. I didn't weep into my pillow. I walked straight to my small, cluttered desk. My fingers, usually trembling from exhaustion, were steady as I pulled out my old laptop. The initial pain had morphed into a surgical precision. I needed facts. I needed evidence. I needed a blueprint for their undoing. First, I needed to confirm. I accessed my bank statements, the meticulous records of every transfer I'd made to my parents' joint account. The dates, the amounts, all laid bare. Then, I remembered a passing comment my mother had made about an online community for Kale's condition. I dug. Hours blurred as I searched, filtering by rare illnesses, by districts, by family names. And there it was. A forum post from my mother, dated 5 years ago, celebrating Kale's miraculous remission and thanking the doctors at a specific clinic for their affordable, successful treatment. 5 years. They had been lying to me for 5 years. The next few days were a blur of cold, calculated research. I started with their social media profiles. My parents, who had always claimed to be struggling, had a surprising number of vacation photos. Sun-drenched beaches, exquisite meals, smiles plastered on their faces. Not the face of people struggling with medical debt. I took screenshots. Every single one. Dates, locations, comments from friends, all carefully cataloged. Then the vacation villa. I remembered a vague mention of Coastal Breeze Realty from a flyer my father had once left on the kitchen table. I used their names, cross-referenced with property records. There it was. A sprawling, 3-bedroom villa in the scenic coastal region of Viridian, purchased 3 years ago. The down payment amount matched, almost exactly, a large transfer I had made around the same time, believing it was for Kale's emergency surgery. The fury was no longer hot and blinding. It was cold and incisive. It fueled me, kept me awake, sharpened my focus. I worked my regular jobs, moving through the motions like a ghost. My colleagues noticed my silence, my lack of enthusiasm, but they just assumed I was going through a rough patch. They didn't know I was orchestrating a symphony of destruction. I became an information sponge. I learned about financial fraud, about tax evasion loopholes, about property law, about employment contracts. I cross-referenced my parents' declared income with the actual cost of their lifestyle. The discrepancies were glaring. They had been claiming Kale's medical expenses as tax write-offs, even though the bulk of the money came from me, and the condition was in remission. They were essentially defrauding the state. I gathered every shred of evidence. Bank statements showing my transfers, Kale's remission forum post, property records, vacation photos, their tax returns, which I had access to as I often helped them with paperwork. I created a meticulously organized digital folder, each file named with precision. Parental fraud Kale's remission proof, property purchase Villa Viridian, income discrepancies tax evasion. My mind wasn't reeling from emotional agony anymore. It was humming with strategic thought. This wasn't about lashing out. This was about justice, proportional justice. They had stolen my time, my youth, my peace of mind, and my future. And they had done it with a smile, a hug, and a cruel joke. I would make sure they paid for every single one of those smiles. The architect was ready to build. But this time, it wouldn't be a house for them. It would be their ruin. The planning was done. The evidence was irrefutable. Now it was time to unleash the carefully constructed storm. I chose a Tuesday. My parents would be at work. Kale, who was now working a perfectly healthy job at a local cafe, as I had recently discovered through a casual online search, would be occupied. There would be no immediate confrontation, just the quiet, unstoppable force of consequence. My first call was to the tax authority's fraud department. My voice, usually soft, was steady and devoid of emotion. I explained, in calm, precise detail, the pattern of alleged tax fraud, the false medical claims, the unreported income used to fund their extravagant lifestyle. I provided them with a link to my meticulously organized digital dossier, offering to forward physical copies if needed. The agent on the other end, initially skeptical, grew silent as I laid out the facts. "We'll be opening an investigation immediately, Miss Elara," they said. "This is very serious." My second call was to a forensic accountant I had researched for weeks. I had saved enough from one of my cleaning jobs to afford a preliminary consultation, framing it as a family inheritance dispute. I outlined the financial transfers, the sudden wealth, the lack of transparency. I provided my evidence, focusing on the discrepancies between their lifestyle and their reported income. His response was immediate. Miss Elara, this isn't just a dispute. This looks like a blatant pattern of exploitation and potentially criminal financial misconduct. He agreed to take on the case, intrigued by the sheer audacity of the scheme. My third call was to a pro bono legal aid firm specializing in elder exploitation, cleverly framing my parents as the victims of a manipulative family member. Me, who had taken advantage of their kindness by gifting large sums of money under false pretenses, which they then used for fraudulent purposes. The twist was delicious. I wanted them to face consequences from every angle. I submitted my documentation, focusing on how my gifts were given under duress of false pretenses, turning their fraud into a complex web of legal issues. The fourth, and perhaps most satisfying, blow was aimed at my mother's reputation. She had recently secured a prestigious position as the head of a local charity foundation, lauded for her community spirit and compassion. I compiled a concise, anonymous email, attaching the most damning of the social media screenshots, my parents on their coastal villa terrace, champagne in hand, a caption about Elara's generosity funding our dream. I also included the specific forum post confirming Kale's remission for 5 years, contrasting it with a recent charity appeal my mother had spearheaded, asking for donations for children suffering from Kale's rare illness. I sent it to the charity's board of directors, to prominent local journalists, and to a few key donors whose names I'd seen on my mother's charity newsletters. The email simply stated, "Perhaps you'd be interested in seeing how your compassionate leader truly operates. Transparency is key, is it not?" The fifth action was a carefully timed leak to a local property gossip blog. My parents, in their arrogance, had bragged about their imaginary architect fiancé, so I ensured their new coastal villa, funded by an unfortunate family misunderstanding, became public knowledge. I submitted an anonymous tip, complete with the villa's address and approximate purchase price, mentioning that it was surprisingly acquired by a local family with modest declared incomes. I knew the blog loved to uncover such discrepancies. Each action was like placing a domino. I watched them fall, one by one, with a chilling satisfaction. There were no grand pronouncements, no dramatic confrontations, just the quiet, relentless pursuit of truth and consequence. I felt no joy, no glee, only a deep, cold sense of purpose. This wasn't about hatred anymore. It was about balance, about ensuring the scales of justice, so grievously tipped in their favor for so long, finally began to swing back. My attack wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, systemic dismantling, and it had only just begun. The dominoes began to fall almost immediately. The first sign of trouble came not from them directly, but from the periphery. A distant relative who had been at the engagement party called me, her voice hushed and agitated. "Elara, have you heard? Your mother, there are rumors flying around about the charity. Something about a huge financial scandal. And your father, the tax authority, showed up at his office this morning. It's a mess." I didn't confirm or deny anything. I just listened, my heart a stone in my chest. This was just the beginning. The collapse was swift, brutal, and exactly as I had orchestrated. Within a week, the first concrete blow landed. My parents' joint bank accounts were frozen, not just some of them, but all of them. The forensic accountant had acted quickly, obtaining court orders based on the evidence of fraudulent activity and unreported income. Their emergency fund, their vacation villa down payment savings, their daily spending money, all inaccessible. I imagined their panic, the dawning horror as they tried to pay for groceries and were met with a polite, firm declined. Next, the car. That moderately new, gleaming sedan my father had been so proud of, claiming it was a gift from a grateful client. Turns out, it was leased under dubious financial claims. The leasing company, alerted by the unfolding financial investigations, moved swiftly. I received an anonymous tip from a former colleague of my father's. "Saw a tow truck taking his car away this morning, Elara." He was screaming at the driver in the parking lot. A small, bitter smile touched my lips. The illusion of their prosperity was unraveling. Then came the news about my mother. The whispers about the charity scandal had exploded into full-blown public outrage. Journalists, sniffing blood in the water, had quickly picked up the story. The anonymous email I sent, coupled with the damning evidence I provided, had been more than enough. The board of directors, desperate to protect the charity's reputation, acted decisively. My mother was suspended, then formally terminated, her reputation in tatters. Her compassionate leader, image had shattered, replaced by accusations of hypocrisy and greed. My father's situation was equally dire. The tax authorities' investigation, fueled by my comprehensive report, moved at an astonishing pace. Unreported income, false claims for medical expenses, Cale's illness, and the questionable funding for their lifestyle, it all amounted to serious charges. He was put on administrative leave from his job, his access to company funds and resources immediately revoked. The threat of legal action loomed large, a dark cloud over their once comfortable existence. The small, rented house they occupied, which I had believed they barely afforded, also became a target. The landlord, a shrewd businessman, became aware of the mounting financial troubles and potential legal entanglements. Eviction notices were served, citing breach of contract due to inability to pay. The illusion of their stable home life crumbled. I didn't seek them out during this period. I let the consequences of their actions unfold naturally, like a slow-motion avalanche. I imagine the frantic phone calls, the panicked accusations directed at anyone but themselves, the desperate attempts to salvage what was left. I pictured them, trapped in their web of lies, watching their carefully constructed world fall apart, piece by agonizing piece. This was the first wave of vindication. A taste of what it felt like to have your security, your stability, your very future stripped away. And it was only going to get worse. The calls started a few days after their bank accounts were frozen. First, Cale, his voice, usually so gentle, was tinged with a bewildered panic. "Elara, what's going on? Mom and Dad are saying everything is gone. They can't access any money, they keep mentioning you." I listened, my expression unreadable. I explained calmly that I had discovered some disturbing financial discrepancies and had reported them to the relevant authorities. I didn't accuse, didn't blame, just stated facts. Cale, to his credit, sounded genuinely distressed, though I sensed a flicker of fear in his voice. He was, after all, complicit in their lie, even if by passive acceptance. Then came my mother. Her initial calls were a barrage of confused anger. "Elara, what have you done? This is a mistake, you've ruined us." I let her voicemails pile up, listening to the escalating desperation in her tone. The anger slowly morphed into fear, then into something resembling grief. Finally, she reached me. I picked up, my heart beating a steady, measured rhythm. Her voice was raw, laced with tears. "Elara, my angel, please, you have to stop this. They've fired me from the charity. Your father is losing his job. The bank accounts are empty. We have nowhere to live. How could you do this to your own family?" The audacity. The sheer, unadulterated gall of it. She was using the same words, the same manipulative emotional appeals she had perfected over years of deceit. Family, angel, the very terms they had used to justify their exploitation of me. My father called next, his booming voice reduced to a hoarse whisper. "Elara, please, we made some mistakes, yes, but we're your parents. We raised you, Cale needs us, you can't leave us destitute, we're losing everything. The villa is in foreclosure, we have nothing left." Cale, coerced by their desperation, called again. "Elara, they're really struggling. Mom's been crying for days. Dad looks like he's aged 20 years. Please, can you just undo it? For me, for the family." That was the moment. The "for me, for the family." The exact same emotional blackmail they had always employed. The tears, the begging, the appeals to shared history and loyalty, it was all part of their script. They weren't sorry for what they had done. They were only sorry they had been caught. They weren't asking for forgiveness. They were asking for a reprieve from the consequences of their actions so they could continue their selfish lives. I remembered their laughter at the engagement party, their casual dismissal of my sacrifices, their cruel jokes about my imaginary fiancé and my pathetic gullibility. I remembered the years of ramen, the aching body, the postponed dreams. And in that moment, the last vestiges of warmth, of family loyalty I might have unconsciously held onto, completely evaporated. I let their pleas wash over me, feeling nothing but a profound emptiness. There was no joy in their suffering, no schadenfreude, just a cold, hard resolve. Their words, once so potent, now held no power. They were hollow, meaningless. They had played their hand, and now it was my turn to show them the full, unvarnished consequences. The begging would not move me. Not anymore. The day came when they formally requested a meeting. Through a mutual, bewildered relative, they asked for a chance to explain and to make amends. I agreed, but on my terms. Not at my studio, not in a cafe. We would meet in the sterile, neutral environment of my lawyer's office. They walked in, looking like shadows of their former selves. My mother's silk dress was gone, replaced by a drab, ill-fitting outfit. Her eyes were puffy, her shoulders slumped. My father, once so robust, looked gaunt, his tailored suit replaced by a wrinkled, tired jacket. Cale was with them, his usual bright demeanor replaced by a nervous fidgeting. My lawyer, a stern woman named Anya, sat beside me, her presence a silent reinforcement of my resolve. They launched into their practiced apologies, interspersed with tears and choked-back sobs. "Elara, we're so sorry," my mother wailed. "We never meant for it to go this far, we were just overwhelmed. Cale's illness was so hard on us. We just wanted to give him a good life," my father added, his voice cracking. "We thought we could handle the money, it was just a misunderstanding." I let them speak, my face utterly devoid of emotion. When they finished, a heavy silence fell. Then I spoke. My voice was calm, steady, and chillingly clear. "There was no misunderstanding," I said. "There was calculated deceit. For 7 years, you feigned poverty, a sick son, and emotional distress to systematically extract every spare penny from me. You created a fictional life for yourselves, built on my sacrifice, while mocking my gullibility behind my back. Cale has been in remission for 5 years," I continued, turning to my brother. He flinched, unable to meet my gaze. "And you, Cale, you knew and you said nothing. You watched me work myself to the bone, believing I was helping you, while you lived a comfortable life, complicit in their lies." My mother started to protest, but Anya raised a hand, silencing her with a look. "This is not about forgiveness," I stated. "This is about consequence. You made a choice. You chose to exploit me, and now you will face the proportional repercussions." I laid out my terms, dictated by my lawyer with the precision of a surgeon. "Firstly," I began, "every single penny I transferred to your accounts, every direct payment for treatments or household expenses, is to be repaid in full, with interest." I slid a document across the table. "This outlines the exact amount. You will sign a legally binding agreement, secured by a lien on any future assets you might acquire, to repay this debt. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action." My parents gasped. "But we have nothing," my mother cried. "Exactly," I said, a faint, bitter echo of their own words. "You will experience what it means to rebuild from nothing, as I did for 7 years. You will live in the modesty you forced upon me, earning every cent back." "Secondly," I continued, "the coastal villa, which was acquired using funds defrauded from me, will be immediately listed for sale. All proceeds, after the existing mortgage is cleared, will go towards settling a portion of your debt to me. You will cooperate fully with the sale. Any resistance will be met with further legal action." My father's face went white. The villa was their pride and joy. "Thirdly, and this is crucial," I stated, looking them each in the eye, "you will never again use Cale's name, or any reference to his past illness, for financial gain or sympathy. The charity you soiled, mother, will pursue you for reputational damages if you attempt to re-enter public life under false pretenses. And father, your tax fraud will result in fines and potential legal action, which you will deal with entirely on your own. My report to the authorities stands. As for Cale," I said, turning to him, "your silence and complicity will be a burden you carry. I will not pursue legal action against you directly, but know this. Your relationship with me is severed, completely. You chose their lies over my well-being." There was a fresh wave of pleas, tears, and desperate arguments, but I cut them off. "These are not requests," I said, my voice unwavering. These are the terms. Sign the agreement, or face the full force of every legal avenue I have pursued. The investigations will continue, the charges will be pressed, and you will lose everything anyway, and potentially your freedom. The choice is yours. Anya, my lawyer, calmly handed them the documents. They looked at each other, defeated, broken. Their manipulation had backfired spectacularly. They had wanted my sacrifice, my financial aid, and my emotional devotion. They had received it, and in return, they had given me a burning desire for justice. And that justice, cold and unyielding, was now their undoing. They signed. Each signature a silent admission of guilt, a final surrender to the consequences of their cruel games. It's been 5 years since that meeting in Anya's office. 5 years since I meticulously cut them out of my life, severing every tie, every emotional tether. The silence, initially unnerving, became a profound source of peace. My old studio in Eldoria is a distant memory. With the first substantial repayment from my parents, salvaged from the forced sale of their coastal villa, I put a down payment on a small, sun-drenched apartment in the vibrant artist district of Solaris. It's filled with books, plants, and the quiet hum of creativity. I finally went back to school, pursuing my long-deferred dream of architecture. It was challenging, balancing studies with a new, less demanding part-time job as an architectural assistant, but it was my challenge, my dream. I've found true friends, people who value me for who I am, not what I can give them. People who lift me up, not drain me dry. And love, I found love in the most unexpected place. At a local community garden, I met Elias, a kind-hearted botanist with a quiet strength and a genuine laugh. He knew my story, not from gossip, but from my own hesitant telling. He saw my scars not as weaknesses, but as testaments to my resilience. We built something real, something honest, far away from the shadows of my past. My parents. Their debt to me, though substantial, is slowly being repaid, penny by humiliating penny, under the strict terms of our agreement. They lost everything. The tax authority pursued their case, resulting in heavy fines and social censure. My mother, utterly disgraced, has never worked again in any position of public trust. My father, unable to secure another stable job, now works menial tasks, a pale imitation of his former boastful self. They live a life of stark modesty, ironically mirroring the life they forced upon me, but without the hope, without the dreams, and without the love that once sustained me. They are isolated, their old friends having distanced themselves from the scandal. Kale, I hear snippets about him from those distant relatives who still speak to me, cautiously. He works his cafe job, living a simple life, forever marked by his complicity. He never reached out again, and I never tried to. The wound he allowed to fester was too deep to heal. I don't dwell on their ruin. It's simply a fact, a consequence. My focus is on the future, on the beautiful life I am building, brick by precious brick, for myself. There's a quiet satisfaction in knowing that justice was served, not through vengeance, but through the unwavering application of truth and consequence. The laughter they shared at my expense, the cruel jokes about my imaginary fiancé, that night at the engagement party, it all rings hollow now. Because I stand here, not only with a very real, very loving partner, but with a life I forged from the ashes of their betrayal. A life of authenticity, peace, and unwavering self-respect. They laughed at my imaginary future, but I built a real one, and it's more beautiful than any fantasy they could have ever imagined.